It was a crisp autumn evening when I moved into the quaint old house with Jack, my boyfriend of 3 years. The house had a rustic charm, the kind you see in movies with creaky floorboards and an attic filled with secrets. We were thrilled to start this new chapter together, away from the bustling city life, enveloped by the serene countryside. The first few days were blissful. We spent our time exploring the nearby woods, unpacking our belongings, and enjoying the novelty of living together. Jack was always the adventurous one, and his enthusiasm was infectious. We laughed, cooked together, and made plans for the future. Everything felt perfect until the night the strangeness began. It was around 2 a.m. when I first woke up to the eerie silence. The moonlight streamed through the curtains, casting long, ghostly shadows on the walls. Jack was not beside me. Groggy and slightly disoriented, I noticed him standing by the large antique mirror in our bedroom. His eyes were wide open, but his expression was blank, almost as if he were in a trance. "Jack?" I called out softly, trying not to startle him. There was no response. He just stood there, staring into the mirror, unblinking. My heart pounded in my chest as I approached him, gently touching his shoulder. "Hey, come back to bed," I whispered, but he remained motionless. I felt a chill run down my spine. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he blinked and looked at me, confusion clouding his eyes. "Claire, what are you doing up?" he asked, as if he had just woken from a deep sleep. "You were staring at the mirror," I replied, my voice trembling. "Are you okay?" He seemed genuinely perplexed. "I do not remember getting up," he said, rubbing his eyes. "Maybe I am just stressed from the move." We brushed it off as a one-time occurrence, blaming the stress and exhaustion. However, the next night it happened again, and the night after that. Each time I found Jack standing in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection with that same vacant expression. I started to feel an overwhelming sense of unease. Something was wrong, and I could not shake the feeling that we were not alone in that house. During the day, Jack was his usual, self-charming, playful, and full of life. But the nights were becoming unbearable. The sleeplessness was getting to me, and I noticed dark circles forming under my eyes. I began to dread the evenings, fearing what each night would bring. One night, determined to understand what was happening, I set an alarm for 1:45 a.m. and pretended to fall asleep. As the alarm went off, I quietly watched Jack. At precisely 2 a.m., he sat up in bed, eyes wide open, and walked over to the mirror. It was as if he were being pulled by an invisible force. I followed him, careful not to make a sound. His gaze was fixed on the mirror, and for a moment I thought I saw something move within the reflection, a shadowy figure, lurking just behind Jack's image. My blood ran cold. "Jack," I called out softly, my voice barely a whisper. This time he did not respond. I reached out to touch his arm, and suddenly his head snapped towards me, his eyes now filled with an intensity I had never seen before. "Claire, you need to leave," he said in a voice that was not his own. It was deeper, more menacing. I stumbled back, terrified. "What? Why?" "Please just go," he pleaded, his expression softening for a moment. "It is not safe here." I shook my head, tears welling up in my eyes. "I am not leaving you, Jack. We need to figure this out together." The next morning, I convinced Jack to see a doctor, hoping that a medical professional could explain his bizarre behavior. The doctor suggested a sleep study, suspecting sleepwalking or a rare sleep disorder. We agreed, desperate for answers. The sleep study was scheduled for the following week. Meanwhile, the nightly episodes continued, each one more disturbing than the last. Jack started waking up with scratches on his arms and neck, as if he had been in a fight. He had no memory of how they got there. I could not take it anymore. I began researching the history of our house, looking for any clues that might explain the strange happenings. What I discovered was far more horrifying than I could have imagined. The house had a dark past. It was once owned by a man named Richard Hawthorne, who was rumored to have dabbled in the occult. He became obsessed with mirrors, believing they were portals to other dimensions. According to local legend, he performed rituals in front of that very mirror in our bedroom, attempting to summon entities from the beyond. One night, during a particularly intense ritual, Richard disappeared without a trace. His body was never found, and the house was left abandoned for years. My heart raced as I read the accounts of people who had lived in the house after Richard S.'s disappearance. They all reported strange occurrences, particularly involving the mirror. Some claimed to see shadowy figures, others spoke of feeling watched, and a few even experienced sleepwalking episodes similar to Jack. I knew I had to do something. That night, I confronted Jack with what I had learned. He was skeptical at first, but the fear in my eyes must have convinced him. "We need to get rid of that mirror," I insisted. "It is the source of all this." Reluctantly, Jack agreed. We decided to remove the mirror the next morning and store it in the attic until we could figure out how to dispose of it properly. As we lay in bed that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better once the mirror was gone. But fate had other plans. At precisely 2 a.m., Jack sat up once again, his movements mechanical and eerie. He walked to the mirror, and this time I followed closely, determined to intervene. As he stood there, staring into the glass, I reached out to pull him away. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and the air around us seemed to shimmer. I saw it clearly this time, a dark, shadowy figure within the mirror, reaching out towards Jack. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. "Jack, snap out of it!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the room. The figure in the mirror moved closer, its hand almost touching Jack's reflection. I felt a force pushing me back, but I fought against it, using all my strength to hold on to Jack. With a final, desperate effort, I yanked him away from the mirror. He collapsed onto the floor, breathing heavily, his eyes wide with terror. "Claire," he gasped, "it is not just a dream. It is real. They are trying to take me." Tears streamed down my face as I held him close. "I know, Jack, I know. We have to get out of here. Now." We did not wait until morning. We packed our essentials and left the house, leaving the cursed mirror behind. As we drove away, I glanced back one last time, hoping to never see that place again. We found a small motel in town and checked in, both of us too exhausted and scared to talk. That night, we slept fitfully, haunted by the memories of what we had witnessed. In the days that followed, I contacted a local historian and a paranormal investigator, determined to understand the true nature of the evil that had invaded our lives. Jack and I were determined to fight back, to reclaim our peace and sanity. Little did we know the real battle was just beginning. The mirror's dark influence was far-reaching, and it would take everything we had to break free from its grasp. The days spent at the motel offered little respite. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow cast by the dim lights seemed to remind us of the horrors we had left behind. Jack was plagued by nightmares, waking up drenched in sweat, his eyes wild with fear. The scratches on his body had stopped appearing, but the psychological torment continued. I contacted Professor Alan Wright, a local historian and expert in occult practices. He agreed to meet us at a small cafe in town. When Jack and I walked in, we spotted him immediately, a wiry man in his 60s with piercing blue eyes and a weathered face that spoke of years spent delving into dark histories. As we sat down, I wasted no time. "Professor Wright, we need your help. We think there is something terribly wrong with the house we are staying in." He leaned forward, his expression grave. "Tell me everything." I recounted the events of the past weeks, from Jack S. nightly episodes to the dark history of Richard Hawthorne and his obsession with mirrors. Wright listened intently, occasionally nodding or scribbling notes in a worn leather notebook. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "You are dealing with something very old and very dangerous. Hawthorne was notorious in occult circles for his experiments with mirror portals. It is said that he succeeded in opening a doorway to another realm, a realm inhabited by dark entities." Jack S.'s face paled. "So, what do we do? How do we stop it?" "The mirror must be destroyed," Wright said firmly. "But it is not as simple as smashing it. Mirrors used in such rituals are often protected by powerful enchantments. Destroying it improperly could release the entities trapped inside or make the situation even worse. My heart sank. Then how do we destroy it? We need to perform a counter ritual, he explained. A ritual that will sever the connection between our world and the one beyond the mirror. It is risky, but it is the only way. He gave us a list of items we would need: candles, salt, herbs, and a specific incantation. We spent the next few days gathering everything, preparing ourselves mentally and emotionally for what was to come. Jack was hesitant. Fear etched on his face, but I reassured him that we had to see this through. On the night of the ritual, we returned to the house. The air was thick with tension as we stepped inside, the oppressive silence pressing down on us. The mirror stood in the bedroom, an ominous presence that seemed to watch our every move. Professor Wright set up the candles in a circle around the mirror, sprinkling salt and herbs in a meticulous pattern. He handed us each a piece of paper with the incantation written on it. "Whatever happens, do not stop chanting," he instructed. "We need to keep the entities at bay until the ritual is complete." We nodded, our resolve firm despite the fear gnawing at our insides. As we began to chant, the room grew colder, the shadows lengthening and twisting in unnatural ways. The mirror-'s surface shimmered, and I could see the dark figure lurking within, its eyes glowing with malevolence. Suddenly, the figure reached out, its hand pressing against the glass. Jack's chanting faltered, but I grabbed his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Do not stop," I urged, my voice shaking. The air around us crackled with energy, and a low growl emanated from the mirror. The figure began to push through, its form becoming more distinct. I could see its twisted features, a grotesque mockery of humanity. "Hold on," Wright shouted over the growing noise. "We are almost there." With one final desperate chant, the mirror shattered, the sound deafening in the confined space. Shards of glass flew in all directions, and the figure let out a piercing scream before dissipating into the ether. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting as if a great burden had been removed. We collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily, our bodies trembling from the ordeal. "It is done," Wright said, his voice hoarse. "The connection is severed." We stayed in the house that night, too exhausted to leave. For the first time in weeks, Jack slept peacefully, his face relaxed and free of fear. I watched over him, my heart swelling with relief and hope. The next morning, we packed our things, ready to leave the house behind for good. As we stood on the porch, I turned to Professor Wright. "Thank you," I said, my voice filled with gratitude. "We could not have done it without you." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Take care of each other, and remember, some doors are better left closed." Jack and I drove away, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but I could not shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. The shadow of the mirror lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the evil we had confronted. As we settled into our new home, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting the dark figure to reappear. Jack was more optimistic, insisting that we had put the past behind us. But deep down, I knew that the mirror-'s curse was not so easily vanquished. Little did we know, the true horror was yet to reveal itself, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. The days that followed our encounter with the mirror were marked by a fragile sense of normalcy. We moved to a new house, a modern apartment far removed from the sinister charm of the countryside. Jack seemed to regain his old self, his laughter returning, the nightmares subsiding. For a while, it felt like we had truly left the darkness behind. But I could not shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I found myself waking up in the middle of the night, staring into the darkness, my mind replaying the events over and over. Jack noticed my anxiety, but assured me that we were safe. I wanted to believe him, to let go of the lingering fear, but something deep within me knew that our ordeal was not over. One night, as I lay in bed unable to sleep, I heard a faint whispering sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I strained to listen, the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from the living room, My heart pounded in my chest as I crept out of bed, moving silently through the darkened apartment. As I entered the living room, I saw Jack standing by the window, his back to me. He was murmuring softly, his words unintelligible. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on his figure, making him look almost ghostly. "Jack," I called out, my voice trembling. He did not respond. I moved closer, my fear mounting. "Jack, what are you doing?" He turned slowly, his eyes blank and unseeing. "Claire, they never left," he whispered, his voice filled with dread. "They are still with us." A cold chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" "They are in the mirrors," he said, pointing to the small decorative mirror on the wall. "They have always been watching." I felt a surge of panic. How could this be happening? We had destroyed the cursed mirror, had we not? The whispering grew louder, more frantic. I looked around, feeling the walls closing in on me. Every reflective surface seemed to shimmer with a dark, malevolent energy. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing Jack's arm. "Now." But as I turned to go, I felt a sudden, powerful force pulling me back. I stumbled, falling to the floor. Jack stood over me, his expression twisted in agony. "It is too late, Claire," he said. "They will not let us go." In that moment, I realized the horrifying truth. The Mirror-S curse had not been confined to a single object. It had spread, infecting every mirror we came into contact with. The entities were still with us, bound to our reflections. Desperate, I scrambled to my feet and ran to the bathroom where the largest mirror in the apartment hung above the sink. I grabbed a towel and threw it over the glass, trying to block the malevolent presence. But the whispering continued, undeterred. Jack followed me, his eyes filled with a strange, resigned calm. "We cannot escape them," he said softly. "They are a part of us now." I shook my head, refusing to accept it. "There has to be a way. We need to find Professor Wright. He will know what to do." We left the apartment that night, driving through the empty streets to Professor Wright's house. When we arrived, we pounded on the door, our desperation evident. The professor opened the door, his face etched with concern. "What has happened?" "They are still with us," I explained, my voice shaking. "The entities, they are in the mirrors." Wright's expression darkened. "Come inside." We sat in his dimly lit study, the weight of our situation pressing down on us. Wright listened as we recounted the events of the past few days. "The curse has spread," he said gravely. "It is not just confined to one mirror. The entities have found a way to attach themselves to any reflective surface." "Is there any way to stop them?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Wright hesitated. "There is one possibility, but it is extremely dangerous. We would need to perform a final ritual, one that would banish the entities for good. But it requires a great sacrifice." "Whatever it takes," I said firmly. "We cannot live like this." Wright nodded, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Very well. We must go back to the house where it all began. The ritual must be performed there." The thought of returning to that house filled me with dread. But I knew we had no other choice. The drive back was silent, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation and fear. As we approached the house, a sense of foreboding settled over us. We entered the house, now a shadow of its former self. The air was thick with an oppressive energy, and the walls seemed to whisper our names. Wright set up the ritual, explaining each step with meticulous care. "The ritual requires a blood offering," he said, his voice solemn. "It must be given willingly, and it must be powerful enough to sever the entity's hold." Jack and I exchanged a glance, understanding the gravity of what was being asked. Without hesitation, Jack stepped forward. "I will do it," he said. "I will be the offering." "No," I protested, tears streaming down my face. "There has to be another way." "It is the only way," Wright insisted. "The bond between the entities and Jack is the strongest. His sacrifice will ensure their banishment." Jack took my hand, his eyes filled with love and determination. "Claire, I need you to be strong. This is the only way to save us." I clung to him, sobbing. "I cannot lose you." "You will not," he whispered. "I will always be with you." With a heavy heart, I watched as Wright guided Jack through the final steps of the ritual. As the incantation reached its climax, Jack made the ultimate sacrifice, offering his blood to break the curse. The air crackled with energy, and the entity's screams filled the room, echoing through the walls. The mirror shattered, releasing a blinding light that engulfed the house. When the light faded, the oppressive energy was gone. The entities had been banished, but the cost had been unbearable. I cradled Jacka's lifeless body, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Professor Wright placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "His sacrifice was not in vain," he said softly. "The curse is broken." We buried Jack near the house, in a quiet spot overlooking the woods. As I stood by his grave, I felt a strange sense of peace. The darkness that had haunted us was gone, but the memory of Jacka's sacrifice would stay with me forever. I am depressed till this day, but life moved on. But I was forever changed. The shadows that had once loomed so large were now just memories, ghosts of a past I had survived. And though the nights were still sometimes filled with whispers and dreams of a dark figure in the mirror, I knew that Jackass' love and sacrifice had given me the strength to face whatever came next. In the end, the mirror had shown us the depths of darkness, but it had also revealed the power of love and sacrifice. And that, I knew, was a light that could never be extinguished.